What's up, everybody, and welcome in to another edition of the Sit Down. As always, if you enjoy this interview, please make sure you hit that like button. Let me know what you think of today's interesting discussion in the comment section below. If you're new around here, you just haven't done it yet, or you're living under a rock and seeing our video for the first time, I don't know what you're waiting for. Hit that subscribe button below now so you never miss another Sit Down video. If you're listening to us currently on iTunes or Spotify, welcome in. I hope you enjoy the show as always. Please leave us a detailed review and a 5-star rating. What's up, everybody? I am your host, Jeff Nadu, and we are back with episode 175 of the Sit Down. It feels like just yesterday I was getting started with this show, and I got to tell you, we have an anticipated, at least from my standpoint, interview that we're doing today. I have, I guess you could say, been hounding the individual we're going to have on today to speak about his very interesting story. He's a man from Boston. I know all of our Beantown people will be excited about this one. He's a guy who has a tragic yet fascinating story. He's a man who gave 27 years of his life to the federal government. Now, obviously, these were his own decisions that he made. That said, he's now out and he's trying to live a much better life. He hobnobbed in the feds with all sorts of people. And I actually found him through all the photos that were posted with him and some of the gangsters we talk about here on this channel. All these guys, though, are people in the end. And I feel it's important sometimes to humanize them and understand their story. We invite him here now. His name is Johnny Bart. And I heard about Johnny Bart that he is a legend in East Boston. We'll see if that's true. John Bartolomeo, thank you for joining my show. This is the Sit Down, and I welcome you. How are you?
Pleasure to be here. I'm doing great. Blessed every single day, Jeff. Every single day is a beautiful day for me. Blessed.
I would say so. I said I'd been hounding you. Is that do you find that true or no? Do you think I've been hounding you?
Well, I mean, listen. First of all, we got to preface everything right with it's humbling that people want to hear my story because to me it's just my story. You know what I'm saying? And I think there's a million stories out there, but only a few get told. So just for people to be, anxious to want to hear my story, people buy stuff with my name on it. People come up to me and want to take pictures with me. And it's a very humbling experience. And that you're interested in hearing my story or parts of my story that we'll talk about today is humbling as well. But of course, my word to, people that like we talked about, my friend Mike Lee, who's bean shooter in Boston. I gave him my word that he would be the first guy to get to interview me when the time came. So my word trumps everything because I always try to be the friend would want to have. You know what I'm saying? And I gave Mike Lee, who's my friend, my word. So I wanted to do that. And I had some other things going on, and I wanted to make just the right decisions for myself and to just exercise a little prudence. And the rest of my life I have become the brand for myself, and I kind of want to listen. I had an experience that was a long time. It was a kind of a long, arduous time in prison, and now that I found that maybe there's a little demand for that type of content, and I'd like to capitalize on it. But I wouldn't say you hounded me. I just, we have a professional relationship, right?
Yeah, you're a very loyal guy. I noticed pretty early, and I love that about you. I think what's interesting about someone like yourself, right, or even like Chad or any of these guys that want to do content or have the story that you have, is we are in a culture. And look, on this channel, I'm not in the streets. I've never been in the streets. I don't claim to be in the streets. I'm just someone that found a niche and I run with it. I'm not going to lie to you. I've interviewed people that have cooperated with the government. Okay, I've interviewed people that haven't cooperated with the government. But I think it's so pervasive in our society that it's okay to just, when you commit a crime, to just telling everybody. And I think there's a respect and ethics that I have. Look, again, I'm not in the streets, but for someone like yourself that you took responsibility for the crimes that you committed, you decided and said, look, I'm not gonna do that. That's not part of what I am. And I guess someone like yourself now it's unheard of, right? It's just not how life is now. And I think that's what makes you just far more interesting than let me ask you, did you ever think, you know, at the times that you were in prison, did you ever think when you got out someday, did you ever think that people would want to hear your story? You know, it's kind of an amazing thing, technology, that we're into this point where people want to hear these types of stories.
Yeah. So I will say this, that, I mean, it's a great question, right? But for me, the answers are complex, so they're not kind of cut and dry, right? So I thought about it, and I mean, I have to say that, you know, in prison, I began to learn, right? And I always say that when I began to learn, I started to have self-worth and began to think, wow, I could really do academic stuff. And when I began to learn and I began to have self-worth and I began to learn more, then I began to dream big. See, these are all little steps in the process for me. So when I began to dream big, I began to see a bigger picture, and I began to see potential for, you know, my story. Sure. So, I mean, and it's humbling, like I say. So I'm not a guy that's really conceited about the things that I have done, because really, when we get into it, you know, events happened in my life that kind of made me, you know, the funny thing about life is you can only live it going forward, right? But only understand it in reverse. So when I see a lot of this stuff in hindsight, I have different feelings. So the short answer is yes, that I did believe that there was value in the story, but not just monetarily, because I believe there's value for people in their own individual lives moving forward and how they conduct themselves as well and what they do, you know, in their day-to-day lives.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. And again, we're glad you're here. We're glad you got the opportunity to be released. And as we'll talk about, you know, you faced a long time and spent a long time. I want to start at the beginning with you. You know, because this is our first time speaking to you. You're from East Boston. Um, Tell me a little bit about your childhood. What were your parents like? You know, what did they do? Was your father in the streets? I mean, I notice a lot of the time when I speak to people, their environments generally, a lot of the mob, you know, the guys in the life, they follow a father, an uncle. Tell me about your childhood. I know you were a big hockey fan. You played hockey when you were a kid. What was your neighborhood like? Just tell me a little bit about your childhood.
First, let me say, so you use the term mob, right? So that's your term, right? That's almost like a media term. So I just say the people in my neighborhood, let's talk about people from New York, people from Boston, whatever the case may be, is I don't use those labels, you know what I'm saying, or those names to describe people. That's almost, you know, it's almost has a negative connotation right off the rip, right? So, and you know, you could use them, whatever. I'm saying everybody uses the terms they want to, but I don't use those type of terms, right? Especially when I'm speaking to a public audience. So my mother and father, I mean, listen, I had the best upbringing in my, you know, that anybody, you know, I told the judge that everybody in the courtroom, when I got sentenced, you know, they should be jealous of me because my parents were so good. We're just a middle-class family, you know? And I mean, my father tended bar when he was a kid, and there was a guy in my neighborhood named Joe Barboza, and a lot of people know him. He became a cooperating informant. He ended up murdered in California.
The animal.
So yeah, and he loved my father, right? And my father, he used to want my father to go out and hang out with him. You know, he was a bartender, so they got close, you know. And many people, you know, of that type were hanging out in the same bars that my father hung out in. But my father always said, you know, he didn't really want the trouble. He was a family man. And he always used to say this. My father had a million quotes, right? He used to say this. He said, John, I ain't bad, but the bad don't mess with me. You know what I mean? So, but that was kind of like, you know, his thing. And he knew a lot of people that lived, you know, unlike his family man life, you know what I'm saying? But he was a barroom guy. He hung out in the barrooms. That's what we, you know, we did in our neighborhood, you know. And my upbringing was great, phenomenal. You know, my mother took me one day and said, John, listen, you got to go through school. You can't get around it. You got to go through it. That's it. I don't care what you want, what you don't want. You know, I wasn't really a school guy, you know what I'm saying? But, you know, they made me go through school. They made me, you know, work, pay rent. You know, they were just, you know, great middle-class parents, you know. So, you know, every day that passes, I have more and more respect for my parents, right? Paying for hockey equipment, paying for ice time, you know, everything that a parent has to do, you know what I'm saying? So, And, both of my parents are dead. And that's part of the price I paid for giving my loyalty to people other than my family. You know what I mean? And I never compromised my loyalty, but in hindsight, regrets, I've had a few. Well, that's one of them. You know what I mean? So my new philosophy now is that I just try to do something to make my mother proud from heaven every day. That's a hashtag I use often on Instagram. So, but I had two older brothers. One of my brothers is dead. Another price I had to pay for being in prison. Can't go to any of the wakes, any of the funerals. And, now it's just me and my oldest brother, Charlie, that are part of the immediate family. So
that's the
but
toughest.
The upbringing was great, work ethic, religious ethic, everything you should have did as a parent. But like my father said, when I got sentenced in court, my father told me, a man does man things, kid. What are you going to do? 30 years out, 30 years in, 30 years out when you get out.
Right. Yeah, that's, I think one of the sadder things we don't realize about people that go to prison for a long period of time is life goes on, right? People get older, right? And it's hard to lose. I lost my father last year. It would be, I couldn't imagine not being there, to honor him and all that sort of thing. And rest in peace to your family, your mom, your dad, your brother. I want to ask about you in, let's say, junior high or high school. What did you want to do in life? Did you, I heard you made you had a quote at one point. You said that when you were a child, you loved motorcycles.
Yeah.
Is that just, did you always want to be like that? Because again, your parents were seemingly great people as far as from what you're telling me, what drove you to criminality? Like what did you want to do in life?
So I think the answer to that in retrospect, right, Jeff, with reflection, with, trying to understand my life in reverse, right, is that, the turning point in my life was learning, right, and acclimating myself with, academics, so I would have to say a fear of learning. So I didn't think really, like I was scared of math, really. I had like anxiety about math. Like school wasn't really my thing at the time. I didn't think so, and I kind of wanted to, my philosophy became make the most amount of money with the least amount of work. And I found out that, actions of like violence and like thuggery, stuff like that was rewarded, so, and that's what I did. And I did drugs as a kid. I even stopped doing drugs and, just kind of concentrated on becoming an arch criminal. That's where all my efforts were, and listen, and I tell everybody that I proved it to everybody else but myself. So I just think that, lack of learning, lack of understanding of, the benefits of being educated, and I tell community leaders when I talk to them that, the biggest thing you could do is provide somebody with an education, because the education brings self-worth.
It absolutely does. But I guess for you, it's really just as simple as you just said it. And I've never heard someone like you say that. I just wanted to make money and I didn't want to work real hard to do it. Right. And that's the thing about money, right? We all want to have a nice car and nice home and all that sort of thing. And look, to get that stuff, you got to work hard to do it. Right.
Exactly.
I've been in this world for 15 years and I'm not even where I want to. It takes a long time. Right. So I get what you're saying. You want to make quick money. You would ultimately be connected to a motorcycle club, someone the government.
Hell's Angels, yeah, it was.
Yeah, so I didn't know if you wanted me to say it.
Sure.
They deem them as the Hell's Angels. They're a 1% group. You start doing things. Obviously, from the little that I know, I don't really talk much about MCs, but from the little I know, you start as a prospect, right? You do what you have to do. Did you have the notion that this was just you just liked riding motorcycles, or did you know? Was it pretty much a foregone conclusion? You were going to have to commit crimes. Did you have a problem with? Didn't you have to think, well, maybe I'm going to have to do something I don't want to do? Did you have that notion of, I don't want to hurt people? Or were you just, I'm going to do what I have to do to survive, and I want to become a member, so I'm going to do what I have to do?
Yeah. It's an interesting question. And the way that you framed it is even more interesting, right? Because I think a lot of people in media circles, put the onus of violence on the club, right? But for me personally, and I can only speak for myself, the club's a much larger entity than myself. So I'm just one guy, right? And anything that I wanted to do. I mean, I did it on my own volition, right? I did it on my own accord. So, I did what I did. And I was the type of guy, Jeff, that, I was just a wild kid. And I wanted, like, how people like say, hey, do all this stuff. I wanted to do stuff in the middle of the street. I wanted to like show you I had a pistol, show you I would use it, split your head open with a shovel, bash your head in with a hammer. I look forward to those opportunities. But, and as I've said, and I'm not trying to glorify that at all, because, events have transpired in my life where, I mean, I don't want to be that person today. You know what I'm saying? I'm not that person today, and, looking back on it, I mean, listen, it is what it is. I'm saying the events that have transpired, I try not to be an apologist.
Mm-hmm.
I went to prison. I did a lot of prison time. I got sentenced to 35 years. And, but I was just a kid that, listen, I got positive reinforcement from doing negative things. So now, and I think a lot of that has to do with, and the psychology of that is that what happens is we perpetuate what others believe we are. So if they say, oh, you're the baddest guy in the block, you want to say, you know what? You're right. I'm going to show you I'm even badder than you think I am. Right. So, and I think conversely, on the opposite end of the pole of that, right, in my life today, I perpetuate who people believe I am today. And like a number one thing about me is I don't drink, I don't do drugs, right? And that's a personal choice of my own. And I really don't have the desire to do it. And it's not really on an Alcoholics Anonymous level or, which on the overall scope of things it is. But I don't feel that I struggle with it a lot. It's just not me today. But, a lot of people will be like, hey, man, you're off the places. Have a drink. Got to have a drink with me. Like, guys are like, want to force me into, no, you got to have, I'm not taking no for an answer. But the way I always say this is, and I always use my friend's 5-year-old daughter. Her name is Stella. And my friend's name is Michael. And he has a daughter. And I want her to have at least me as one example where she sees, well, Uncle John don't never drink. Uncle John don't smoke. Uncle John don't do this. So, if I can set a good example for at least her and other people's children, friends, anybody, you never know, how your influence, transcends many different levels, right? So I want to be that guy, and I want to keep perpetuating the person you believe I am today. So that works both ways, I think.
Sure. But back then, as you alluded to, you wanted to be someone who don't fuck with me,
Right.
don't.
Oh,
don't
100%.
Okay. I have to ask, I heard that you, and again, maybe you can clarify. I heard you were one of the first or the youngest patched over members in that club in the area, right? Is that true?
I was, at the time that I got in, I was the youngest guy in the club. Yeah.
So look, we've all seen, like, and I don't know if you've seen it, but like Sons of Anarchy, right?
Mhm.
Right. That show. I've heard some people say it, some of it's, somewhat true and some of it's not. But in the show, they allude to the fact that when you become a patched in member, it's similar to other organized crime. I've talked to guys who, became members, if you will, of a certain subculture. They talked about it being a very proud moment in their life, what they had always wanted. Do you remember that night offhand that you became a member? And
Sure, I remember it.
how'd you feel?
I felt like I accomplished something, right? I wanted to do it. I set a goal and I did it.
Did you party? Like, did you tell people? What was that like? What do you do that night? Do you just go home?
I mean, yeah, of course you want to go out and show everybody, that you've taken that next step, But I didn't drink or do drugs when I was in the club either. So.
Okay. So getting that cut, that's a big thing.
Sure it is.
Very cool.
Absolutely.
What year was this? Do you remember this?
That's probably going to be around 97, 90. No, I went to prison in 96. So 96 maybe.
So early 96. Pretty late in your career. Do you remember that guy there?
Yeah, it's Greg.
Awesome. Yeah, it looks like a camaraderie, obviously, that your brothers, right? That's what you talked about in a quote you had with when you got sentenced. So I want to kind of fast forward, ultimately things go on, obviously club business you're doing, you're earning, you're out there doing what you have to do to survive.
I wouldn't say doing things that I didn't have to survive, right? I had a great family. I wasn't doing things to survive. Like I told you, it was just, this was something that I had in my head that I wanted to do. You know what I'm saying? But, you know, when I just want to interject, if I could, for 1 second, Jeff, right?
Sure.
When you say that, you know, how was that night for me and how was this?
Mhm.
That it was great. I was a kid. I was at a different point in my life, you know, but it pales in comparison, right? When I got my first A on a trigonometry test and I was in my cell by myself and I had like tears in my eyes because I believed I could academically succeed. So those are the moments that stick out to me now. You know what I'm saying? So I'm farther away from, you know, and, you know, you're a guy that, you know, of course you want to know about, you know, a lot of the more juicier details of before, you know what I'm saying? Because that's the genre that you have. And I respect that. But my story is, you know, the moments that, you know, I succeeded academically. Those are the ones.
Well, and that's something that like you have like a tale of two lives, right? I mean, like I've told you on the phone, we've talked, like you have a story that very few people have, right? You've lived a fascinatingly interesting life. I look at it like the world of content that I do. Eventually, I won't do this anymore, and I'll do something different. And it's just two lives for me. That was
Well,
that.
let's hope we have a good show before you stop all that, huh, Jeff?
Sure, absolutely, absolutely. So I want to kind of fast forward. Obviously, you're engaged in doing some things. Look, if someone really wanted to know, they could find that out.
Listen, my life's an open book, Jeff. You can talk
Yeah.
about anything you want. My
Yeah.
story's my story. I tell it the way I want to. And the one thing you're going to get is you're going to get 100% the truth because I can't make this shit up.
Yeah, ultimately, and you mentioned you know had no problem using violence against people. Your group or people around you or you yourself became engaged in a kind of a back and forth with another group. You down the road would intercede with someone from that group. You were indicted for essentially
I killed a guy and I assaulted another guy with a hammer.
I'll just ask, I mean, were you prepared to kill anyone? You were okay with that?
It really didn't matter to me at the time. No, that was, I mean, when I look back on it now, I'm saying it's a recipe for disaster, right?
Sure.
So I'm saying, obviously, here we go about living it forward and understanding it in reverse, right? So, perspective is everything in life. So, and I believe my perspective was skewed at the time, and I was living a much different life than I am today. So, I mean, the answer to the short question is yes. Not a problem. Not a problem.
Well, some of the evidence that the federal government brought against you was a conversation you unwittingly had with an undercover, right? Where you made a point to discuss what you had did.
Right.
Do you think that was, that was obviously incredibly damning to your case? You were ultimately indicted, a 17-count indictment in 1996. You obviously were identified as someone who engaged in selling narcotics. You hurt people. You ultimately, as you just said, killed someone. In the end, you were given 420 months, and in layman's terms, that's, for anyone not good with math, that's 35 years, as you talked about. You're in your 20s at that point. You're still a pretty young guy, right? What was it like to hear those words, 420 months? What was it like at that time? That's longer than you've been alive, right?
Right.
What are those things like hearing? How did you process that?
So, and it's interesting too, because it started out as a death penalty case, right? We were being threatened that it was going to be a death penalty case, and they were going to Washington to get, authorization to indict us under the death penalty because it was murder in the aid of racketeering. So, I mean, I guess processionally, at first, right? I mean, you don't care about the cops, right? You don't care about, I didn't care about anything. I didn't care. Like, come and get me until they come and get you, right? Then, they throw you in a cell by yourself for the first time. You got, a pair of khakis on with a pair of blue shoes, and everything you hear around you is just whoop, and everything just stops. And then that gives you a different perspective, right? Then it's like, well, what about my mother? What about my father? What about I got this? What about doesn't matter. Nothing matters anymore. So your perspective changes from day one, right? And then the easiest thing to do would be like, hey, how can I get out of this? Right? How can I get out of this mess right now? Okay, this is the mess I'm in. How can I get out of it? Right? For me, there was no getting out of it. Right? I mean, I could never do anything to compromise my own integrity. I would never do that. And I think a lot of the perspective is that I thought everybody was like me. And you find out down the road that very few, are ready to, take a life sentence on the chin in essence, right? So it felt horrible. It felt, it felt terrible. But I'm going to tell you this, Jeff, when I went into the day room the first day and I was in jail, I looked at it and I was like, like 90% of these guys now listen, this is me not talking as a humble guy that I am today, right? This is me talking as a 26-year-old guy that was ready to fight anybody, ready to do anything. And listen, I got, disciplinary infractions for everything but taking hostages when I first went to jail in Wyatt. I mean, insane stuff. But that I look back now and say, like, even how did I even get away with having? I'm not even out of jail for doing half that stuff. But I would look at the people in the day room and say, these people are suckers. If these suckers can do time, I can do it.
Right.
You know what I mean? So that was my, reasoning, my method of thinking at the time. You know what I'm saying? And that's how I started from there. If these suckers can do it, I can do it.
Well, I have to ask you, we all have preconceived notions about prison, what it's like. Obviously, you were a far different individual at the time, than most people. But I have to ask, before you went in, like, did your father ever sit you down and say, is this really what you want out of your life? Like you said, your dad was a good man. Your mother was a good woman. I would almost look at it and say, I don't want to let them down. Did they ever say to you, maybe this isn't something, do you really want this for your life?
Oh, 100. Listen, my father used to say, kid, nobody's worth doing the book over. That was another one of his lines. You know what I'm saying?
That's a great point. Yeah.
So, and, my mother would be like, oh, John, Jesus, John, my mother was very religious. And of course, Jeff, right? Of course, they would counsel me. They would admonish me even from, don't do this, don't do that. But I was always the guy that would be like, man, it's not like that. You think it's like this, or Dad, it's really not like this. And then guys would come over, right? Everybody in the club, my house was the house to hang out at, and, Jeff, we're talking about, guys that were, great, phenomenal dudes, great guys, come over, have a blast, love my mother. When I went to jail, Jeff, it's, we always, not me, of course, but I mean, media types always try to paint the club as a very, negative entity. And
it's not that, right?
So everything with a black brush, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
And it's not fair because, I mean, you can have your opinions and maybe your opinion is different from mine, but my mother and father never missed a Christmas when I was in prison. My mother and father never missed an anniversary. My mother and father never missed an invite to a party, to people going down there and to baskets of fruit and, presents, gifts. Of course,
probably helpful when you have that, right?
Listen, Jeff, I never went without a commissary. When I wanted to go to Ohio University, guys made a collection, got 10 grand for me so I could go to school. So the thing about me is that, Jeff, if you're in my corner, I'll die with you. I love you. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, I can't help but love the people that love me.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's probably also significantly easier when facing these, hard things in life. True friends are a refuge. I believe Aristotle said that. True friends are a refuge in any hardship. So,
I like it.
And family too, for that matter. Having a good parent, good parents.
Right.
Well, again, no matter how you slice it, though, 35 years is a long time. I want to read a quote that you said. Quote. Then this is back then. If you told me today that I could go home to my family, if I would denounce being a member of the Hells Angels, I wouldn't do it. I'm a Hells Angel in my heart and bones. You also discussed that you didn't have, you obviously had disapproval for people who take the, quote, easy way out and cooperate with the government in exchange for a reduced sentence. I have to ask, no matter how you slice it, 35 years is a very long time. Did you ever give any thought to saying, I don't, I'm going to get out of this somehow? Did that ever cross your mind?
Yeah. So, I mean, the thing is do I ever want to get out of this? I mean, people change, things change, right? So anything that I put my name on, I have to take a look at and see if it's for me, right? That's not about wanting to get out of anything. I never want to get out of anything. If I'm in something, I'm going to handle it.
You just want to make your situation better.
That's just the way it is. You know what I'm saying? Now, of course, to assess the situation as we go down the line and assess the situation to say, hey, is this for me anymore? Is this situation for me? Is this place for me? Is this organization for me? I'm saying that's everything. That's in flux, Jeff. That's always, I always reserve the right to make my own decisions, right? And I'm a type of guy that, it takes a lot for me to put my name on something, So did I ever think that, can I take the easy way out and, be less of a person and compromise my integrity? No, I never thought that ever for 1 second. Nor would I ever think that. And I'm in the position that I am today. And, I have the type of, acceptance that I have with people that don't even know me. And, it's just like a whirlwind. And I would, advise people. I mean, my best advice got me in prison for 35 years. So I can tell you what works good for me. I won't advise nobody on anything. But, I always sat back, right, and slept on things and thought long and hard about things. And I always thought about consequences, since I've been in prison, of course, and since I've been home. But, I always, if people ask me about, the rats in your case, how do you feel about them? I feel sorry for them. I feel bad for them. I feel bad that they couldn't hang on to get the welcome that I got, because there's great people in the world and people respect and recognize people that do the right thing. There are those people out there. And I'm blessed across the board in every facet of life. I have people that are some of the most outstanding human beings on planet Earth. And I like to think, that that's a testament to me, but it's also a testament to those people as well.
So you kind of have the adage of, there's a film, great film, 1996, it was made about John Gotti. And in the film, he talks about, let them, in terms of Sammy Gravano, he says, let him have his winter's protection, everything, but he's always got to stare at that rat, looking him in the face.
I don't think that. I see, the thing is I think people can justify anything, Jeff.
But what I'm trying to say though, John, is like at the end of the day, no matter how you slice it, Michael Franzese, Sammy Gano, those guys, they're celebrated by a lot of people now. They have the welcome you're talking about.
No, and that's to your point. So I didn't disagree with you. I actually agreed with you. And I'm saying that, anybody that does something can justify why they did that.
Right.
This might look like this, but this is why it's this. I've never went to a guy in jail and said, yo, you're a fucking stool pigeon. Beat it. Get out. You're going to get smashed. Be out of here by 4:00. This is. And nobody ever said to me, oh, man, Johnny, you got me. Nobody ever said that. Everybody's like, no, you don't understand. And they believe themselves. And I believe people believe themselves. And that's all right for them because, as another quote that a friend of mine gave me a long time ago is time will tell and shit will smell, right? So, I mean, like when I say I feel bad for them, they probably justified their lives, but to be celebrated the way that I've been celebrated, it's nothing short of amazing to me, right? And it just, I'm not a bitter person. Whatever happened, happened. Today's today. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I just listen, care makes small things grow, right?
Mm-hmm.
And lack of it makes great things decay, right?
Oh, sure.
Everybody has cared for. I've had people that care for me from day one all the way to today. And there's been a multitude of people. And everybody has worked in their own role, in their own capacity to make sure that, this second right here, right now, has been a great moment for me.
Yeah, you seem like you have a good peace of mind. I want to get into your time in prison.
Sure.
How old were you when you were sentenced?
So I was 26 years old. I was going on 27.
Yeah, so you're basically in mid-20s, you know, most regular folks, I mean, they're maybe buying a house or getting married, but you were going to USP Leavenworth. That was the first place you went, right? Um,
Yes.
this is kind of an imposing place, right? I mean, that's obviously the front.
Try walking up the front stairs in handcuffs and shackles. Tell me how imposing it is.
Yeah, it looks like a very imposing place. I mean, we've heard about Leavenworth with, you know, obviously military and some of that stuff. I want to ask you about the first night you were at Leavenworth. Do you remember that
Yeah,
night?
absolutely. Vividly.
And so,
Every
so I have
night.
to ask, give us the lay of the land. Are you in a cell with someone else?
Yeah.
Okay, you don't have to say who it is, but um, do they say to you like, "Hey, this is my stuff, this is your stuff"? Do they ask you any questions? And I guess, how was the sleep that night?
I mean, you know
Was your
what?
mind
I
just
really
kind of
don't.
racing? Did you accept it? You know?
Well, so, I mean, it's hard for me to sleep anywhere on the first night, right? This is my cat Killer right here. You come into the picture.
Shout
I
out to the
call him Killer
cat.
because he can't hurt a fly. But
Okay, I like that.
so no, I walked in the door, Jeff, and I asked for the Boston guys, and everybody from my city knew who I was. I mean, you know, it wasn't.
Nice.
It's not. You know, I mean, I got carte blanche wherever I went. You know what I'm saying? Everybody knew about my case. You know what I mean? So no, none of that. You know, if anything, people were overly generous and trying to make me as comfortable as possible. So no, I never experienced any of that.
Okay, so put the hat on that you're talking to people like myself who haven't been to prison. You're talking to, let's say, 100 people that haven't been to prison. Okay?
Right.
What would someone like yourself do if you were in a cell and they brought a new cellmate in and it was an informant, a chomo? What would be the protocol there?
Yeah, I mean, they wouldn't bring them in. I wouldn't live with them. I don't live with them. They have
So
to,
you would decline that.
they'd get, forcefully removed. Hey, go tell the cop you can't live here. You can't stay here.
Did that ever happen to you?
Many times.
Okay, because I think one thing
No,
I've
but
learned
those are
about.
now, Jeff, when you talk about this, you have to really put this stuff in context, right? Because it didn't happen in the penitentiaries. I'm saying the penitentiaries were it's a very divisive place, divisive place, however you want to pronounce it. But it's, those things don't happen. Like when I went to Leavenworth Penitentiary, before I got out on the line, I had to personally have an interview with the captain when he would have to ask you, are you okay to go out here?
So they have
Leavenworth Penitentiary. Are you ready to go out on the line here, or do you not want to go to the line?
And that's just for your own safety. I'm worried about it.
Listen, there's people getting stabbed out here. There's
But you had no worry
very,
about that.
very political. There's, racial politics. There's, there's organizational, parameters you have to go by. I'm saying this is a very structured, strict, restrictive environment.
Didn't you ever worry though about maybe retribution for some of your behavior on the street?
Listen, I'm on the yacht every day. Everybody knows where I'm at. I had a situation where somebody was saying, "Hey, these guys are waiting for you on the yacht." I said, "Listen, I go out there 7 o'clock in the morning. I'll see you then."
Right. What was
What are you gonna do? Where are you running to? Where you going to? Idaho? Right. Where you going to hang out? It's right. Over. I'm saying somebody got to handle something. Let's handle it this morning.
Yeah, and one thing I learned about the feds is that you obviously have that point total, and that's where they send you. And then as years go by, they take you to lower institutions. You were at quite a high place, USP. That's one step from the top level, right?
So you can't go any higher. You know what I'm saying? I mean, the structure, the way it is, with ADX, you would have to be sentenced, and that's the only way.
Then that would be something you would have did inside, so you weren't ever
exactly. Or a judge could actually, the BOP could put you there, a prosecutor could. So, but the 99.9% of the people that go there have murdered somebody in jail. They go for a program up in ADX and stuff.
Absolutely, sure. The end of the line, right? All right, so I want you to take us through, because I've never quite had anyone do this on this show, but I'm curious. Let's just say, what's the typical day like for you? Start at the beginning.
I'm the oddball here, though. I'm up at 4:30 in the morning.
But you can't you can't just go out and get a continental breakfast. You just gotta wait, right?
No, so all right, I'm up at 4:30 in the morning. Now it depends what security level I'm at too. So if I'm in a penitentiary, I gotta wait for the door to the cell to open. If I'm in a medium, if I'm in a low or a camp, it's a dorm setting, so I could actually move around a lot better And when the cops are starting to count, there's a 5 o'clock institutional count in the morning every morning. I'd have to just be at my bunk, but I could do anything in the meantime. You know what I'm saying?
Let's say you're at a USP. What time does the door open?
The doors crack between 4:30 and 5:30.
Okay. And is it a thing of like you have to have your bed made and all that shit, or?
Yeah, well, I'm saying it depends. I'm saying I would, of course, you know what I'm saying? Rules and regulations dictate that you should, of course, after 8 o'clock, after the first work call bell rings, by 7:30, you should be all set. Your cell should be in compliance.
So from 5 until 7:30, you're just, what do you do then?
I'm already done working out, Jeff. I'm ready. Okay, I'm ready for tomorrow.
Okay. So you go to breakfast at like, do you go to breakfast or do you
I generally didn't go to breakfast. You could go to breakfast, but I kind of made my own food. I prepared it.
Okay. You weren't a fan of the food?
Well, I mean, not that I wasn't a fan of the food. I'm just, I'm trying to live a 35-year sentence out so I can be in good shape when I get out.
Yeah. So you probably feel like maybe the food's not good for me. So I'm not.
Well, I mean, I got a contract with maybe somebody in the kitchen. I'm buying stuff from the commissary. That's the best stuff I can get. I'm preparing my meals beforehand.
So did you have a job you go to, or?
Yeah, I mean, job was like 15 minutes. You know what I'm saying?
What do you mean by that?
You should work 8 hours a day, right? Or 6 hours a day, whatever. But, it's kind of like I always had a no-show job, Jeff. So
okay.
I could work on myself and work on my education.
Is that quite a norm in there?
I mean, to some extent, because people, let's face it, some people do need to work. So people work Unicor, which is a very good paying job in jail. People try to hustle to make as much money as they can to survive. I didn't need that, right? Because I had a lot of people that were supporting me. Thank God.
And obviously we know a lot about, we've heard the word car, right? That's these groups of people that kind of congregate together, and you were in the Boston one, obviously.
Sure.
Do you see those folks a lot, or?
Today or
no, in there, like, do you guys
saying we all hang out together?
But is it like a congregation where you're just like sitting around all the time?
Oh, we sit in the chow hall together, everybody, So now when you're in the unit, you're in individual units. So say there's 12 units in a jail, everybody's divided equally into those units. So you might not see 5 guys that are in, you might see 2 guys that are in your unit, you know where they're at, you're hanging out with them, shooting the shit with them, you're doing, whatever with them, hanging out together with them, and, just hanging out, doing your thing.
What was I have to ask, what was like the shower situation? What was that like?
I never showered, Jeff, so I don't know. I'm just kidding, Jeff. You said what's the shower?
But I guess the question that I would have
but I'm just being facetious anyway.
No, I know. I guess
so the thing is like when I was in Wyatt, that was like a pretrial place. Mm-hmm. You had just a pole with 6 showers. Everybody just showered together. You know what I'm saying? Okay. But in like when I got to Leavenworth and all these other places, showers were kind of divided a little bit. You had a degree of privacy.
Well, let's talk about your time in more of the lower, like not the USP, because that's obviously significantly different than like a medium.
Yeah, significantly.
So you kind of tell us some of the places you're at, because you've been at a lot of different joints.
12 institutions.
Yeah, you were everywhere from Farrington to Lee to all these.
Yep. Schuylkill, Berlin, Lewisburg.
Yep. One of the things that I mentioned about you is I've seen you in a lot of photos, prison photos,
right,
with all sorts of guys, New York guys, and
yep,
all these different types of people. Obviously, this show is a certain subculture. We talk about it on here. Some of the folks you've been around. You can
describe it any way you want. I'll describe it a little different.
Jeff. Yeah. Well, I want to kind of be respectful. I think it's honorable that you don't want to say that.
It's impossible to disrespect.
But here's my thing, and this is where, like, as a normal guy, I interviewed a guy called Chris Colombo. His father was a guy, Joe Colombo. You've heard of the Colombo. We've heard of that, right? And he had a real problem with me saying the word mafia.
Okay.
And no matter
say whatever you want.
Right. But here's what I'm saying, John. Whether or not you or Chris Colombo, the mafia is not a fake group. They're a real group. They exist. They're out there. And I guess I just kind of don't want to be respectful of you and not say it.
You can call it whatever you want to call it. If I agree with you, it's a whole nother story for another day, or then I'll even comment on it. Say what you say. Okay,
cool. So you were around all sorts of guys. I've seen you in a photo with Lee DeVanzo, pretty interesting guy. What was Lee?
Was my bunkie. I love Lee. Great dude.
Yeah. He's a good guy.
Love them. We
I
had
think
so
that's
much laughs
something.
in McKean. You know, we laughed to keep from crying. You know what I'm saying? That's what we did. That's all we did was laugh.
And you just told stories and
Listen, I'll tell you a story. One day we were in McKean, right? It was so hot. And we had this little fan. It was about this big, Jeff, right? And Lee's just sitting there in the cell. Me and him are bunkies, right? He's sweating. He's sweating. I get in there. I'm sweating. I look at him. He looks at me like, and he just like, we want to kill each other because it's just so hot. Like, you know what I'm saying? And he goes, don't even stop with me. Just don't even stop. Like, you know what I'm saying? Because I always like to bust his balls. He busts my balls. But listen, I mean, that which is bitter to endure is always sweet to remember. And I can look back on it now. And, you know, we had a great, listen, laugh to keep from crying, right? We miss our families. People are dying. We're missing freedom. But we made the best of it. And we always had good guys around us to make the best of it.
well, I have to ask about Lee. Lee's wife was on a certain show. I'm not going to talk about. Did he have an issue? Did you ever talk about that or anything?
I mean, you'd have to ask Lee those type of things, right? So, and I haven't talked to Lee to even discuss what Lee's opinions, right? So this is my own story, but I remember that, there was a show. We used to watch the show, whatever the case may be and I've talked to Drita on the phone.
Oh, you've watched the show, really?
Huh?
You watched it in there, or you've watched
I watched it. Absolutely.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. How does that work? I'm curious.
When you're familiar with somebody and you watch something, it's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, absolutely. I would think. What's that like, the TV situation? Because we've heard people control the TV.
Oh God, McKean was a nightmare. But I ended up commandeering a TV, and that's another story for another day. But everybody that was there with me knows the story.
Is there just one TV or?
No, so you got a bunch of TVs, right? Usually, I'm saying we put labels on things that people wouldn't understand probably in freedom or in the free world, right? When we say things like there was a white TV for the white people, a black TV for the black people, Spanish TV for the Spanish people, those things were true in prison, whether you like to hear it or not. But it was just the way it was, and there wasn't, I don't think there was anything,
we can't equate
about that. I just think it was the way groups were kind of put together.
Right. And obviously, as you alluded to, prison is way different than the regular free world. Out here, race is no longer an issue for people. Right. But in prison, it's the way that, that's just how it is. You don't try to.
Yeah. And, just to interject for 1 second, that it's a racially, I don't know how you would pronounce the words, divisive, right? It's a racially divisive place anyway. But, to that, I would say, we use categories for people and we put people in, use generalizations, right? But I met some guys, that, weren't white, that were some of the best people black people that were the best people that I've ever met, some Spanish people. I mean, the Spanish people, right, taught me how to speak Spanish, I mean, I taught myself, but I mean, their help to me was, it was integral to my growth in, learning and mastering the language, right? So, I mean, I could never say nothing negative or derogatory about that. And I know a lot of white people that turned out to be, their word was no good, their case was no good. And there was, people of other races that were solid stand-up guys. So, I mean, I think that's, I think that's indicative of all societies, right?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. There's bad folk, there's bad people in all sorts of groups, and that's why I've never understood the whole racism thing that people have. It doesn't make sense to me. I want to ask you, because one thing that I don't know that you've ever thought about, and maybe you have, is you went into prison at such a fascinating time in the world, right? The end of the 90s, right? You're coming up on a new century, and you look at between, let's say, 1998 and 2023. I mean, the world has become significantly different. I remember when I was 9 years old in 1998. The difference now between then, I guess one thing I've always been curious about is, are you familiar with all the changes that are going on in the world? Like, do you, when you hear the word cell phone, like, did you know what that was at the time? Like,
it's a really good question, right?
Yeah.
And I always say this, right? And I think it's a universal truism, right? Is the only constant is change, right? That's the only constant. So it's change all the time. And I like to use kind of a little realization that I had to maybe put everything into perspective for people is that when I was 13 years old and I was standing on Utah Street in East Boston, and I came to realize that I was like, oh, I'm Johnny Bart. This is my neighborhood. This is the way it was. This is the way it's always going to be. But it was a fleeting second in time, right? So that's all it really was. So the only thing is that the only constant in life is change. And getting back to your point, I always tell people that I wasn't in a box, underground for 27 years, right? I watched TV. I've talked to people, and I've had, the opportunity to learn through a lot of different avenues. So I always understood, that life is the ever-changing, entity, right? I'm saying life changes daily. Technology changes daily. But we always used to like to say, oh, it's a time of dramatic change. All times of dramatic change, right?
For sure. For sure. I got to ask you, you were in prison when September 11th happened.
Yeah.
Do you remember that day at all?
Sure, absolutely, vividly.
What was the thought about in there? Like
a lot of people were happy that it happened, because the people were anti-government. You know what I'm saying? So,
okay, really?
And I'm saying, yeah, it's a different perspective to think of. People cheered when but my point has always been this.
Yeah, but
no
hold on a
matter
second.
What your view is.
Hold on. I'm curious about this. Why would people be happy about it?
Right. So, and
it's all innocent people that are being affected, right?
Because, a lot of people that are anti-American that, there's some people that are in there, prison, right? That ain't from America, right?
Yeah, sure.
And they don't believe in Christian values and this and that, whatever the case may be is. But my point to people all the time is this. No matter what you believe in, if you believe in another government is right, if you believe in, no matter what you believe in, when the supposed enemy comes over here to try to wreak havoc on us, they're not going to say, oh, this guy's different. He believes in us. We're all getting murdered. So we either got to live together or die together. You know what I'm saying? So, on one level, I can understand it, but on another level, I really don't understand it. But obviously looking back on it now, right? I look at my own mortality. I look at, the people I love. I lost my brother. So I juxtapose all those feelings. I killed somebody, right? And now I juxtapose those feelings about how I felt and my mother felt when we lost my brother. And I'm contrite about what I did, you know what I'm saying? Because I engineered those feelings in other people, and I'm not comfortable with it. So just to give you, a little off track, but to give you a little bit of perspective. But in there, the way people reacted is everybody's individual reaction is their own, right?
I think most of America, no matter where you were, was you couldn't believe it. You're blown away. It was obviously a very sad day. You mentioned to me that your cellmate at one point was John Spirito. You mentioned to me Johnny Joe.
Love Johnny Joe.
I think you told me
one of the best guys ever. See, when you try to ask me to pick a favorite guy from New York, it's hard, right? There's so many, but I tell you, Johnny Joe taught me a very, very valuable lesson in life. Johnny Joe. Now here's the serious guy no matter how you slice it. We used to play gin every day at Count, right? And he used to fucking destroy me. I think maybe I won 10 games out of 200. And I get frustrated, get mad, start ripping the cards up, throwing them in the toilet. And he would start laughing, right? And now I'd look at him and he'd be like, I'm only laughing because I'm nervous. I'm only laughing because I'm nervous. He would try to diminish and curtail this whole, the episode that was going on. He didn't have to do that. He'd stand up and say, what the fuck? What are you, a sore loser? But he didn't. And he taught me a valuable lesson that the joke can always be on me, and that's all right. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Sure.
So, and he taught me that lesson. But listen, stand-up guy, generous guy, the most, listen, he was the happiest guy I knew. He was in a good mood every day, had a tremendous family. I can't say enough good things about him. I love him to death. Just a phenomenal. I lived with him for 2 years. And the way I get into the cell with him is a whole nother story for another day. But
that's interesting.
Great guy.
I want to ask you about a couple of people that we've all heard of. You did time with Bruno.
Listen, Bruno it's a comedy show 24/7. If you're around Bruno, right? If you're around Bruno Indelicato, you're going to have a smile on your face every day. And like, unless you know, like you ain't a good guy. If you're a good guy, you're just gonna have great. Listen, there's another guy that just made time go by. I was with him in Fort Dix. Never a dull moment with Bruno. He was always somebody like you could see him coming from a mile away, and you knew you were gonna smile. Your day was gonna get better when you see Bruno.
He seems to be kind of like a jokester, from what I've heard. That makes sense.
Yeah.
You did time with Bobby Manna, is that correct?
Bobby, oh yeah, well Bobby was more of Bobby. I was with Bobby in Leavenworth and again in Fairton.
What was his disposition like?
Bobby's a serious guy. Bobby was just, very reserved, very serious. Not, he was older. You know what I'm saying? So he was older at the time, but everybody loved Bobby. He always had 5 or 6 New York guys with him that used to take care of him. Just a tremendous dude. You knew his hair was meticulous. He always kept himself well, very respectful. Just one of those guys that you're talking to somebody that's somebody.
Right. Absolutely. I would think.
Great dude. I
got 2 other ones.
Talk to me.
Bobby Cabert.
Cabert. I used to bust his balls every day. Listen, he had the freshest mouth. We'd be playing gin, right? And he'd be like, listen, you wouldn't believe what came out of his mouth. He used to tell me, now, listen, I'm the worst gym player in the country, right? He told me stories about, gambling stories that, hilarious. But he used to say, you're so lucky, you motherfucker. You could shit in a swinging jug. That was the funniest shit he used to say to me. You could shit in a swinging jug. But listen, I used to bust his balls all the time. He had big feet, right, Bobby? So I get down there, right? We go down for coffee, be in his slippers. I'd be like worked out already, and I'd bust these be down there like one eye open, one eye closed. And they'd be like, Bobby, have you looked at your fucking feet lately? Look at those fuck. John, would you leave me the fuck alone? Get out of here. Just a great camaraderie. Just, he used to bust my balls. I bust his balls. But, I had utmost respect for the guy. I loved him. You know what I'm saying? Loved him. He had so many great stories. He was such a tremendous, so Mikey Perna was a dear friend of his, and I was with Mikey in Fairton, right? And I remember when Mikey came and gave me, I'm going to be lying if I told you exactly what newspaper it was. I think it was the New York Times. It was a prestigious newspaper that had this tremendous article about Bobby. And, that he was a gentleman. And, we couldn't believe it. We thought it was just a great homage to him. And, just a great guy, Bobby. Phenomenal dude. Loved him.
Well, I have to ask, just because from what I've heard and from rumor is John Gotti he liked him a lot. He was a big fan of Bobby. Did he ever tell you any stories about John?
It wouldn't surprise me if he was, right? But the things that Bobby told me in confidence are the things that Bobby told me in confidence.
Fair enough. There's also a rumor that, and I believe Cabert has confirmed this. Maybe I don't know if he's absolutely come out and said it was true, but there's also a rumor that I'm trying to think who it was. I want to say it was Joe Pesci. I think patterned that Funny How scene in Goodfellas off of Cabert. Have you ever heard of that?
That would be news to me. I truly didn't know that, and that's interesting if it was. But
yeah, I believe Joe Pesci had met him at some point, and
is that right?
Again, it could just be a rumor. I'm not sure.
And listen, he had the 2 guys. I remember hearing these guys' name all the time. They rang everybody. They were dear friends of him, and I used to think the combination of the name Arnold and Funzy. There was 2 guys, Arnold and Funzy. There was his partner, and I heard their name all the time, and I was like, and he became friends with him. But I just thought it was such a great combination, Arnold and Funzy, and I never met them. I wanted to
I mean, I'm not going to go into their story, but
yeah, right. Whatever the case may be, is, but that was a Cabertism right there. Arnold and Funzy. Good. So
yeah, those 2 guys are stand-up guys too. Jersey guys too. One other one I want to ask you about. Yeah. You did time with Henry Borelli, who obviously has his reputation, but I think one thing that I've always noticed about all these guys that I've looked into is I think they were just people that they did what they had to do. Like this was their job, right? And Borelli obviously has a reputation. What was he like?
So, I mean, from your perspective, right, Jeff, I'm saying, of course, you're only shaped by your own experiences. You can only tell me what you believe because your perception of the situation. But I knew these guys, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And Henry was just a sweetheart. Listen, Henry was meticulous. Henry, everything was ironed. His hair was parted to the side. But the thing about Henry, right, that was almost a little unsettling, he would look at you and his eyes would bulge a little bit. You know what I'm saying? And I really liked Henry. And Henry I used to run a card game on the 3rd floor in Leavenworth Penitentiary. And I remember him telling me that, you know, and the only way Henry could explain anything was like, you know, his eyes would bulge and he was like, I work in the barbershop. If you ever need to wipe up blood off the floor, there's napkins and there's towels in there. And I cleaned them the next day. And I was like, all right, Henry, thanks. You know what I'm saying? And it's an interesting tidbit, you know, but he was just a class act, very, very classy guy, very well respected, of course. And, you know, I consider him a friend. He was a friend. I say hi to him every day. How are you, Henry? How's everything? You know, look forward to stop and talk to him, get a few minutes with him. You know what I'm saying? So I think he lived on the 1st floor with Joe Massaro lived in the same unit he lived in.
Yep.
Yeah.
I know him.
Just a tremendous dude, Henry.
You and I want to just clarify, you mentioned you worked in a barbershop or he did?
He worked in the barbershop. I ran a card game, a gambling game.
Hold on.
Up on the 3rd floor. And sometimes there would be trouble. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you know, you're running a gambling operation in a federal penitentiary with, you know, at Leavenworth Penitentiary, right? That got the name the Hut House. You probably understand you're gonna have a situation or two.
Oh, absolutely. Right? well, I guess I want to understand this. So he was a barber?
He worked in the barbershop. He was an orderly.
Okay, I was going to say that's fascinating that they allowed him to hold shears and stuff.
Well, I'm not quite sure that was the case. I'm sure that he like swept up, mopped up.
Wow.
Same thing I did in the unit. I used I had a little area of the unit. I mopped up, I swept up, and then I was done for the day. Henry just happened to work on a different floor. Happened to be the barbershop. He was a barbershop orderly.
The blood story that's fast. That's funny. That's a very.
I mean, it's an interesting. Nothing ever happened. It was just something that he had said to me that pretty interesting to share anyway.
Yeah, that is interesting. So kind of fast forward to not present day, but at one point you'd mentioned to me like you learned Spanish. You were in the law library a lot. I know you're a very intelligent guy.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. I've even read like some of the things you penned some letters to like the judges. You're a very well-spoken guy. I guess you always had the hope you didn't have life, right? You were going to get out at some point. Was the notion of you were just going to prepare for that day? Did you have an idea of what you wanted to do? And I guess the day that comes, did you have to like, do they call you and say, hey, you got a release date? Did you know what your release date was? How does that all work?
So, and, I appreciate those kind words, right? And you said, I don't say that because, I always compare myself to other people. Like, so people say, oh, you know Spanish? Wow, it's crazy. You can speak it. You understand it. You read it. You write it. And I'm saying, well, what about the guy that speaks 6 languages?
Right.
What about the guys that are professors that, there was a little moment in my life when I did trigonometry that I probably couldn't do now. I mean, the thing about trigonometry is practice and doing problems and understanding, tangent, cotangent, all this stuff, right? So that's just something that you could practice to do. And it's humbling to me, believe me, because I never thought I could learn, and I did learn. So, and when you're asking me about like my trajectory through the Federal Bureau of Prisons, listen, I never thought I'd get out of prison. That was, part of me always thought that, but part of me, I'm such a frugal guy that I would never want to waste 2 years of studying and working out, even if I had 30 more to go. You know what I'm saying? I just like, I can't waste that. I already invested that. I can't waste it. So I got to continue. And that's kind of what drove me is my frugality. You know what I'm saying? So I tried to do something for my mind and my body every day. And, by my own standards, I'm not where I want to be, especially like with Spanish. People say, I'm so good with Spanish and this and that. But, I've been doing it since 2015, right? I think I should be a lot farther along than I am. But I do pretty good for myself, I guess. You know what I'm saying? I stuck with it at least.
And that's impressive. You were ultimately released about a year ago, let's just say.
Yeah, actually almost a year to the day. So August 30th of last year.
And you just got off, the
bracelet.
Yeah.
So I'm done. So in essence, my sentence continued until August 26th, 2024, which is about 5 days ago, 4 or 5 days ago, right? I can do trigonometry, but I can't do basic math. Imagine that.
Well,
So,
I want to ask.
my sentence is done because they cut the bracelet off. Now I got probation,
Sure.
parole.
Yeah, supervised release, right.
So how they give you a date? So I was in the drug program, right? I tried to get a year off my sentence. I had FSA. I got a year off my sentence. So everything kind of happened all at once. But I knew I was getting my date. And, you know, an interesting story about my date is they messed up my FSA time because I had been like one of the only persons at the time where I had been in the shoe like before FSA was even going into effect and as far as they went back. But I had stuff that I was in the hole and it just disrupted the whole FSA calculator for me. And they took all my days away mistakenly. And, you know, it was on they had an FSA summit, a First Step Back summit. And that was the first name that came up. They were trying to fix this glitch they had in their computer. So what happened is that I got it squared away a little bit later. So everybody that was graduating from my class graduated August 1st and went home. I got a date of October 30th. But what happened is I had a case manager. Her name was Miss Vargas in Lewisburg camp. And she was such a, you know, I'm not going to say sweetheart. She was a professional. She was the consummate professional. But I had always done things for the administration. When I waxed floors, I always kept it, you know, her office clean. Do you need anything? You know, can I do anything for you? I took care of the cats, you know, and, you know, I tried to, you know, of course, at that point in my life, everything, something to make my mother proud every day. And, you know, interacting well with staff was one of those things, of course. I don't cooperate. I don't give information. I looked out for everybody. I tried so nobody would get in trouble so we wouldn't lose time. But she did something that almost brought tears to my eyes. She called the halfway house coordinator and she told a person, she goes, I've been doing this for X amount of years, you know, an extremely long time. And this person is the best person I've ever had on my caseload. If anybody deserves an early date, it's him. And the only reason why he didn't have it is because his FSA issue. And I ended up getting a date that was 2 months. You know, I got August instead of October. So that was really nice to what she did. And she did it on a professional level, of course, because she thought I deserved it because of all the work I did at the institution.
Yeah, that is a really nice thing to do for somebody, you know, and we think
it's amazing that you can leave an impact on people. You know what I'm saying? And
yeah.
I left a halfway house the other day and one of the coordinators there was actually like in tears and saying, you've done so good, you know, like, so that's humbling to me that I could have that effect, that I could do that to somebody. And, you know, I think that's something else that my mother would be proud of, you know?
Yeah, there's a notion that every person that works at a prison or in you know, that kind of thing is just.
They didn't put me in prison.
Yeah, exactly. But like, it's nice to see that there are people that still have a heart and are willing to be nice to someone about something.
I got zero complaints. You know what I mean? I mean, these were good people. You know what I'm saying? Like this, listen, like we just talked about before with in you know, the racial aspect of it, right? I mean, there's assholes everywhere, you know what I'm saying? And unfortunately, they live forever. There was a few of them I encountered, but for the most part, the majority of people, especially as I got into my bid and I started to get like 20-something years in, they would always be like, hey, Bartolomeo, what's up? Like, you know, wardens that were lieutenants that I knew would call other wardens and say, hey, did you see Bartolomeo? Tell him I said, what's up?
Okay,
just
cool.
Decent folks.
So you had a pretty good reputation throughout the system, regardless of whether it was an inmate or an overseer. I got to ask you, it's funny that this happened to me today, but I don't know where you are in the world, but where I'm at. Okay, yeah, I didn't know if you were still there or not. Like today's like a perfect day. There's not a cloud in the sky. It's 70 degrees. It's just beautiful. And I walked outside earlier because of running, and I just looked up at the sky and I thought, wow, you know, it's just a beautiful day. You know, that just the feeling that you have when the sun hits you. I got to ask, the day you walked out of prison, what was that like? What were the feelings that you had? Were you just kind of worried about the future? Was it just, I'm just happy to be out? Because it's not like you were inside for 27 years straight. You had air, but like free air, right?
And you know what? I mean, obviously, listen, up there with one of the best days of my life, of course, right? but it's really a consolation prize because I lost my parents, my brother.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things I can never get back, right? So there's some regret on that level about, how I, dispersed my loyalty and stuff. So some regret, right? Of course, bittersweet. And, but just an overall amazing day, and, the people that picked me up are true friends and, that I love that have been planning this, that have done more for me than I could ever do for myself. My friend Gio, my friend Mikey, my friend Leo that came to get me, and just, I'm the type of guy that I am because they have set an example for me to be who I am. So I learned how to be a friend from my friends,
Sure. Friends are important as we talked about earlier. I want to ask you about, I have one final question for you. I want to see what you're up to now. But I want to ask you a couple of questions just about prison overall that I've always been curious about. And I'll start with this. What do you do with a snoring cellmate? How do you deal with
that? You can't murder him, unfortunately, right?
Of course.
So, so I always thought there was a commercial a long time ago about, Western history. And they said, Western cowboy type stuff. And they said that John Wesley Hardin, so mean he once shot a man for snoring. And when you're in jail, you say to yourself, is that mean or is that just the right thing to do? But obviously, you try to get a guy that don't snore, you know what I'm saying? And when you get a guy that does snore, man, it's hard because, if God made anything better than earplugs and headphones, he kept it for himself, right? So that's one way to combat it. So you try to get into a situation where you're with somebody that has the same sleeping schedule with you and doesn't snore. So, it's a conundrum. It's a difficult situation to navigate.
At the end of the day, again, there's not much you can do, I guess.
What can you say? Like, hey, I fucking hate you because you snore? Yeah, you want to, but
yeah.
You got to try to, move to another cell, try to figure it out, get somebody that is a heavy sleeper. You try to navigate just one of the many navigational problems in prison.
Another question. Do you still follow, like, I'm a big routine guy. That's just how I am. But do you still follow the same routine? Like, do you still, like, I guess you could never quite realize, like, how great sleep is when you don't have anybody there. You're in your nice bed.
Listen, living alone, the one thing I missed in prison was solitude.
Sure.
If there's anything better than living alone, God kept it for himself.
I agree.
Because I love that, I'm able to sleep. Since I got off the bracelet, I didn't come home the other night because I stayed over at a friend's house, which was a pretty amazing night anyway. But,
nice.
My cats were a little upset with me. My cat, I went down to a 9 on a cat dad, but yeah, routine's important. I'm saying, if there's two things that guard against Alzheimer's disease, according to Dr. Sanjay Gupta, is sleep and routine. So a lot to be said for it.
Well, that's good for me, I guess. Do you have any, you mentioned you weren't a big, you didn't necessarily eat the meals, but is there any meal that you particularly liked in prison that we'd eat regularly?
Listen, I had people making me stuff out of the kitchen. I had contracts with people in the kitchen, but I ate high protein vegetables, I don't know. Did I have a favorite meal? Not that I can remember.
What was the first thing you ate when you got out of prison?
It's funny. Everybody asked me that, you know what I'm saying? So we had Panera bread on the way home, you know what I'm saying? Which was pretty good, I'm saying. But you know what? I got to tell you this, Jeff, so everybody kind of prepared me for the change. That's why, I like to say I had a seamless integration. But I had support. I got care, people that care about me. It's easy when all I did was walk through open doors, Jeff. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's pretty easy for me. 2 of my friends, 3 of my friends, one guy's a chef in Ben Cardo in Boston, Fabio. My other friend's Nicky Verano that owns a bunch of restaurants. My other friend is, Frankie DiPasquale that owns a bunch of restaurants. I've ate at their places and, it's phenomenal. All their food is great. You know what I'm saying? I go there and every time I eat there, it's the fireworks go off in my mouth. But I'm not, certain places like in the North End of Boston is really good food, But I had a couple of steak places have been good, but I like to cook my own meals. I eat broccoli and steak and chicken and eggs. I'm into health engineering foods.
Yeah, I noticed you're in great shape, which, again,
Appreciate that.
Health is wealth. one other one. Obviously, besides like technology, because that's changed a lot, but what was the biggest noticeable difference between, let's say, 1998 and 2023?
Demographic in
So like
East
your neighborhood.
Boston. Yeah, it's different. You know what I'm saying? So just the demographic is different. That was the most dramatic change. For
Pricey
me,
there now, huh?
Excuse me?
It's pricey, right?
Yeah, I'm saying, well, I mean, the development that's another thing that was very surprising.
Yeah.
I mean, they're building everywhere in Boston. Boston is but so the demographic for me was the most dramatic change that I've seen visually, But I mean, East Boston to me is beautiful, so I'm just talking about my city. I don't live in East Boston, but I'm there quite frequently.
We don't quite think about like when you were kids, like how much different our city looks. I want to ask you, before I ask you our final question, what are you doing now? What's the next? What's your future look like? What do you do? I know you have a clothing company you've developed. You got a lot of your stuff. And I actually, you did a good interview with Bean Shooter. Shout out to Bean Shooter.
No, Bean Shooter is the best. Become a great guy, close friend of mine. Go on Instagram and follow Bean Shooter. He's a Boston icon.
And I want to actually shout out Bean Shooter. He did some really good work with that, exposing a certain individual recently.
Yeah, that guy. Yeah,
because I'm a big fraud.
He's the real deal. He got nothing to hide, so that's why I like Mike.
When I do that too on this channel,
became close friends.
Yeah, John, I do that on this channel. I expose, these fake people that aren't real. So he did a good job with that. You're doing your clothing. Like, what do you want to do? What's the future look like for you?
So for me, right, I created a brand. I was in jail for 27 years, right? So I had this idea to make 27 STRE, 27 straight. So all these shirts that you see behind me, it's just part of the collection that I made. And, again, as I said, it's a humbling thing that, people buy things that I make, that I design, that have my name on it. And, that's going really good for me, so I'm able to make a day's pay, a week's pay, so
good for you.
Yeah. And I mean, ultimately, I want to brand myself. I want to be the brand. You know what I'm saying? I mean, this shirt right here says the brand, right? So the brand is 27 straight, but ultimately, I love doing forums like this. I love, talking to people. I love, sharing my story. And if, anybody has, can take anything away from it that, that's anything that's positive. I guess my message to people is that, learning brings self-worth, right? Self-worth brings the thirst for more knowledge, which allows you to dream big, right? And allows you to enjoy your life really to the fullest, to really experience things. And my philosophy today, I always, my thing is at the end of everything I talk about is always do something today to make your mother proud, right? Because if you did something today to make your mother proud, you'd feel good, right? It'd be a good thing, right? You wouldn't do drugs, you wouldn't get high, you wouldn't get in trouble, because those are the things that will make my mother proud, was to stay away from all that, hold the door for somebody, help somebody that needs it, just be nice, be courteous. Yes, sir. No, sir. No, ma'am. Yes. Be courteous to people. And I think that, that's my philosophy. So I say, if you could do that once a day, your life will be better.
100%. You're dead right with that. I've had your Instagram up. Everybody go check out John on Instagram, Johnny Bart. I'm sure he'll respond to you if you want to reach out to him. Go check out his merch. He's got some really interesting stuff. I'm definitely going to buy some stuff, so make sure you do as well. I got one final question for you, John. I want you to go back to 9, 10, 12-year-old John. If you could do it all over, would you have ever entered into the world of criminality? Do you have regret in your life? Do you wish you could have did it over? Because again, there are things that we all wish we could do over, but our life is our life and we don't have many regrets. Are you regretful of giving 27 years of your life to the federal government? Do you regret, the decisions you made?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, right? And it's a thought-provoking question, and one that I really like to have about 6-7 hours to take a walk, reflect, and come back and tell you that, right? But I regret losing my mother and father and my brother. I regret that, right? And I regret, that I have to come to terms with those failings every day, right? But the person that I am today and what has happened in my life, I think everybody's journey is different, right? And I think that I wouldn't want to be anybody else but Johnny Bart.
That's a great answer. I mean, you seem to be pretty steadfast in your conviction and your fortitude and just your stoicism. I find that to be pretty honorable. Like I said, I'm not in the streets. I've never said to be, but I find individuals like yourself um, interesting. I find the stoicism to be quite honorable to me, and you stand on your conviction, and that has to count for something. Um, one other quick point, and then we'll let you go. I promise.
Absolutely. You don't have to
When
let me
you
go. I'm yours, kid. That's it.
Yeah,
What's
no,
up?
that's nice of you. When you leave prison, I mean, there are a lot of guys, look, it's likely Bobby Manna will never be released from prison. It's likely Henry
Is he
Borelli, all these
still
guys.
alive, Bobby?
Bobby he's in his, I think he's 93, 94.
Wow.
He's quite old. I mean, there are, a bunch of guys that will never see
Let's
the
give
light
a
of
shout
day.
out to Kevin McTaggart.
Shout out to whoever,
You
absolutely.
know who Kevin McTaggart is, right? Kevin
I've heard the
McTaggart on
name.
the west side of Cleveland. He came to jail in 1984, still in jail.
Yeah, I mean, you look at guys
Another
like
mentor.
Yeah, a lot of those guys, like Bobby came. I mean, I think he was put in prison in 1988, something like that. I mean, it's such a long period of time. What do you say to people like that? Do you feel anything for them? And also, do you when you leave, do you say to like, hey man, I'll see you, I guess sometime maybe. Like, do you exchange? Like, how does that all work? Do you say like bye? Like, how does that work?
Yeah. So, right, interesting question. And I will say this, many people have left before me. And they're like, they're excited. How can you be excited for leaving prison, right?
Sure.
Most
Yeah,
exciting day of your life. I don't care if you've done
absolutely.
20 minutes or 20 years. It's exciting. You want to share
Mhm.
that excitement with people. And I've never had a problem with it. They're like, oh, I don't want to tell you. I'm like, hey, listen, again, like the officers and the cops and the administrators, they didn't put me in prison. They
Yeah.
didn't get put here
Right.
to aggravate me. I came to prison, right? So when you're leaving prison, I didn't come with you. We didn't do nothing together. I just knew you from here. I wish you all the best. However, me personally, I always think in the back of my mind, when is my time gonna come?
Yeah.
And my time's never gonna come because even after I did 5 years, I still got 30 to go. It's never coming.
All right.
So what I will say though is, you heard about, we have this where a guy gets supposed to catch a flight, he misses it somehow, he's late, and the plane crashes. You get that, you become like, why not me? Why did they die, not me? So I always think about guys in prison still, like, especially Kevin, man. Kevin's been in jail since '84, and I always think about him. And he calls me, and I'm working on something for him with a lawyer in Cleveland and a couple of my other contacts in Cleveland to try to do something for Kevin. And man, it puts me in perspective right off the rip.
Well, it's funny you brought that up. I watched recently on 60 Minutes. It's called Survivor's Guilt. There's an individual, and we talked about
Yeah.
September 11th. There is only one known person that survived the collapse of the World Trade Center. There was one man. He survived. He was on the 26th floor, and he just went into a corner. It came down, and he survived. He went
Right.
home that night. That's how crazy the story is. And he talks about that all the time. Why did all of them die? Why did all my he worked for the Port Authority in New York. Why did all my colleagues die? What do I deserve this? And I think, in a way you can kind of relate to that too. Because as you said, Kevin or Bobby, Bobby Cabert died in prison,
Yep.
Joe Kane died. A lot of these
All of
guys,
us, right?
and
So
it's
I'm sorry.
no, go ahead.
I think that, if I got what I deserved, right, Jeff, I'd be dead 700 times.
That's
They'd
true.
still be torturing me. You know what I'm saying?
True, yeah.
But instead, I got, a lot of blessings and a lot of gift wrap situations in my life. And I try not to question that, but I just try to be humble and I try to be grateful. And that's my payment for the life I'm living today. And I try to help people, Jeff, because listen, for people gave freely to me, right? So I have to give back to other people. It's only right.
Sure. Well, Johnny Bart, you're a fascinating guy. You have a very interesting life. I think we're going to see good things from you. You seem like you really just have your eye on the ball. And I got to tell you, one thing that I find really incredible about you is that, like, I know so many people that have pretty good lives and they're negative about everything. Like, why the fuck? Why, nah, 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 nah. Even myself at times, I find myself like, why am I negative about everything? And I haven't talked about it. Maybe I will at some point, but I recently had a come to realization moment. I went away for 5 days and I went somewhere where I learned a lot about stress and grief. I was having trouble with my father dying, and I learned so much. And I noticed like there are certain things that I worried about that like I just shouldn't worry about, and they're not
Life's meant for
important.
living. Don't worry
Right.
about dying. Worry about living today. That's
And
what life's
you're like,
about. If you're gonna spend your life worrying about debt, live your life. That's
yeah,
what it's
that's
for.
right. I noticed that about you. Like you're very positive, and I think at every point you've maintained positivity, and you have any reason to be kind of bitter, right? You know, you lost a lot of your life. Again, your own decisions, but that's a long time. And I think your positivity will help you in the long run. And I'm sure the Spanish will help you with certain things. You know that you're
Sin duda alguna.
yeah,
That means without a doubt. But go ahead.
yeah. Good, good, good. Well, I'm happy for you, man. I'm sure there's if any way I can help you, I will. I think you should
Maybe
do a
you did just
podcast.
now.
Well, good. I think you have a podcast. You should have one. You'd be very good. You're very
Appreciate
kind of
that.
open and forward. So,
Maybe
Johnny
me and you
Bart,
will collaborate on some of those things we
I
were
would love
talking about
to.
earlier
I'm
today.
here to help, my man. You're a good dude. Everybody, go check out John on Instagram. Official Johnny underscore. You'll see it right there. It's right there. All right, John. Thanks for coming on, man. I really appreciate you, and maybe we'll talk again soon.
Thank you.
We'll see you next week here on the Sit Down.